r/askreddit. Serious, scientists of Reddit, what is something you desperately want to experiment with that will make you look like a mad scientist? I'm a physician and I would love to see how far the placebo effect really goes. For those who are not familiar, the placebo effect is an unexplained phenomenon where people who take medications that aren't real, but they believe are real, have an actual, measurable effect on their illness. People with depression who take sugar pills report feeling happier. People with pain who take sugar pills report a decrease to their pain, etc. I've seen even crazier ones where people think they are having surgery for their bad knee, but the docs just put them under, make an incision on their knee, do nothing, sew them back up and patients report improvements to their bad knee. So part of me just wants to explore this shit to its full extent. Can we treat chronic illnesses like arthritis, lupus and bipolar disorder with just placebos? What about viral illness? Can you imagine if someone's HIV viral load decreased while they're eating Skittles thinking it's a new miracle drug? But it's pretty much just fantasy. You'd have to take two groups of HIV positive individuals, give one real medicine and the other one Skittles, and this is profoundly unethical. Edit. For those of you who are saying that's how clinical trials work, the answer is not really. According to the Article 11.3 of the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the ethical guidance of clinicians overseeing clinical trials, it is unethical to use placebo arms if there exists a proven medication for the condition. If you are testing a new drug, your control group is whatever the best treatment available on the market, not a placebo. It's very rare that a disease condition has no effective treatments out there that would justify the use of a placebo to measure clinical effectiveness. In my HIV example, this is obviously not possible. We have meds that lower HIV viral load. There was a really good story on NPR this past weekend. A guy that was dubious of faith healers decided to study the effect. He watched and learned the technique and then started to apply it in an act. His act stated that he was a fraud from the start. He did his thing and, much to his surprise, started to have actual healing results. His theory was that people get in the habit of being hurt and continue on acting in ways they would have if they were still hurt or still healing. His act, and the act of real faith healers, gave the people reason to change their habits and function as if they were not hurt, which at that point, they were not. Not because of faith healing itself, but because they healed on their own but didn't admit it. A friend of my mum's basically attempted this. One of her work colleagues suggested it. She's a nurse and basically her partner was having problems in the bedroom, so she told her to make him take these. They were mints that were distinctively resembled a certain drug. Basically she gave them to him and voila, the mints work. She couldn't bring herself to tell him that they were just mints. Experiments with social isolation intrigue me. Raise a child with no language and see what happens. No contact. While children give us some insights, but also a sample of the kind of trauma this can produce. Completely and undeniably unethical. Incredibly cruel. But so intriguing. This have already been done and documented in the past. There was this king who believed that children raised in completely isolation would naturally speak Greek. So to test this, he ordered a group of babies to be placed in isolation from adults, and a few times per day midwives would feed clean them. The result of this experiment was that every single baby died, even although they were being fed. I'd like to raise a child with absolutely no conception of liquid. Until they're 18, all water is to be consumed intravenously, and all waste is to be done in a controlled environment where they can't see it. Then just throw them in a pool. Oh, I wanted to do this too. Except raise a group of children to believe ears are a taboo organ. Everyone wears earmuffs all the time, and it's naughty to show each other your ears. Then see if it develops into a fetish as they get older because we've stigmatized it. Kind of like how breasts vary in levels of risk array throughout the world. I would like to try and lengthen my telomeres and see how that affects my personal aging. Long story short, cancer. I wouldn't say mad scientist, but medical privacy laws get in the way of a lot of incredibly useful research. Everything has to be so de-identified and confidential that it makes doing any sort of large-scale statistics nearly impossible. You have to make a ton of assumptions because you can't know many details. If I had full access to everyone's medical records, we could probably fix a whole lot of shit. Several years ago I had the most ridiculous interaction regarding HIPAA. I had applied for a job at a drugstore and was offered the job. I told the manager I would fail the test. I was taking prescribed narcotics. He told me I couldn't tell him that it was a HIPAA violation. When I went to take my pre-employment drug test, I took my prescription bottles for the narcotics I was taking, since I knew I would fail the test. They told me I couldn't tell them that information. HIPAA violation. A week later I get a call from the testing company telling me I tested positive for morphine and asked if I had a valid prescription. I told them I did. They asked me where I had it last filled, and it just happened to be at the Walgreens where I was now testing for. I had gotten the job application while waiting at the pharmacy. Testing company calls drugstore to tell them I failed, and they would follow up. Testing company calls me to inquire about legitimacy of the meds in my system. Testing company asks me where I filled the prescription. I tell them I last filled it at this very drugstore. Testing company then calls drugstore to verify the prescription. Pharmacy manager tells them the script is okay. Testing company then calls the same damn drugstore again to tell them that they themselves verified the prescription. Drugstore then calls me to tell me that my prescription that I had just gotten from them was legit. Twins have very similar DNA. If raised exactly the same way without interaction with each other, would they make the same choices? There have been studies done where separated twins choose the same career, marry a woman by the same name, and maybe even call their kids by the same names. It was crazy specific. I want to take DNA from infamous serial killers like Dahmer or Albert Fish or the like, clone them, then have the baby raised in a normal, supportive, loving family. I'd study the kids all through adulthood to see how much is nurture and how much is nature. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you turn a mad scientist into a dead scientist. I want to do a long-term case study on children's microbiome. It would start with samples of their mother's microbiome, and then when the child is first born get a sample of theirs, compare it, and continue comparing the two samples throughout breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. Also get a detailed comparison of how the microbiome changes after vaccinations, sickness, antibiotics. I would basically study every single poop this child has, their eating habits, their health conditions, any medications, vaccinations, etc. for years. But people want privacy, and most wouldn't want to commit to keeping such accurate accounts of their children's food health activities, so it's likely that even if I did this study it would be difficult to prove all variables were accounted for. And with all the variability I would need many children. The end goal is to see how our microbiome changes throughout your childhood, and note when you may be more susceptible to things depending on the type of microflora you have. Everyone has a different ratio, so essentially if we can harness the individual's capability of unique flora we could find a whole new way to tackle illnesses and preventatives for sicknesses that would have significantly less side effects than many other medications. This idea stems from others studying the microbiome and finding that certain ratios of microflora can cause you to get over illnesses quicker when combined with the right medicine, and also help digestive tracts regulate better. But so far these tests are being done with cancer patients. I think if we're able to see how children are affected it may bring less possibilities of cancer and other illnesses down the road, as well as a faster recovery time. Edit. Everyone telling me to have a kid or become a nanny and collect it. No. The point of this study is it needs to include thousands of participants. I would like to clone myself. Nature versus nurture. Sorry dude, you can have as many kids as possible with one woman, but you cannot clone yourself. Can't do it even once. Identical twins is totally fine also. I'm where you're at, ethically. I can't see a compelling reason why we shouldn't. In fact, my best guess is that it has already been done, just not revealed out of fear of a PR nightmare. The typical discovery and clinical testing pipeline of a pharmaceutical looks something like this. Cell culture, rodent models, other animals, primates, rabbits, etc., humans. If at any step the drug fails the test, either for toxicity or efficacy, the potential drug is next. And this process of discovery and clinical testing can take up to 10 years at the cost of billions of dollars. What happens if your model systems can't fully recapitulate the human disease phenotype? So what happens if you've got a drug that might work really well in the human, but we never know, because it gets trashed because there's no response in the mouse model? Now I completely understand the ethical concerns with testing on human subjects from the get-go, but if you asked me to don my mad scientist lab coat and goggles, I'd try to push for earlier testing on human subjects. Yeah, guinea pigs are allergic to penicillin, so if they were used for testing, penicillin could have been rejected. I want drug Olympics, where everyone using something to enhance performance. To see true limit of humans. I've participated in the ketamine Olympics many years in a row now, which just involves everyone taking a bunch of K and trying to do basic physical activities. Not exactly what you're referring to, but had some pretty fun results. Animal-human hybrids. I experiment on ancient coins. Museums are generally against me doing a full compositional analysis, as that would involve me dissolving the whole coin in acid. But it sure would tell us a lot more than not. It's generally a bummer how many kinds of analyses are destructive. Though I do remember doing a cool experiment in intro chemistry to determine silver content through neutron activation. Lot easier to do when there's a reactor under the site building. I'd love to study language development. For example, stick a bunch of babies on a remote island without outside influence and document how they learn to communicate. According to past research, they just die. I'd never do the experiment, but it's hard to overstate how helpful it would be to have large-scale, longitudinal data on how different chemotherapeutic drug cocktails affect the evolutionary trajectory of tumors. The problem is that in order to study it, you'd need to 1. Give a large number of people experimental or substandard care, which is highly unethical. 2. Perform serial surgeries even when they aren't medically necessary in order to collect tissue samples from the tumors, and since every surgery carries with it some risk, this is also highly unethical. I would really love to have a hunk of plutonium in the attic above my bedroom. I mean, the right amount would have to be sussed out first, of course. They found that some buildings in Japan had been made with irradiated steel from stockyards near the blast zones of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and the people that lived in them had abnormally long and cancer-free lives, presumably because, oh, there's a scientific term for it, where your body comes into some kind of homeostasis with snake venom over long enough exposure to small doses. They think that's what happened with those people and the radiation as well. Their bodies adapted to it and became far less prone to have cancer because of it. Also, it would lower my heating bill in the winter. Plus, I really wish we could just use breeder reactors as well. Honestly, I think the government should give them away to property owners, as it would benefit the United States greatly to have a populace of people off the power grid, powering themselves independently and greenly, with a stable power source that will last 100+ years for their needs. The economy would benefit, people would be more able to afford housing, and emissions would go down.